Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanyika. He's an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks for joining us. The Iraqi city of Ramadi is on the verge of being taken over by the Islamic State. News reports detail that fierce fighting overnight has led to the capture of at least 3 nearby villages. Thousands of people have already fled, and according to Iraqi officials, suicide bombers deployed by ISIS have targeted checkpoints on government buildings. The assault on Ramadi has changed the current in favor of ISIS once more, just as the U.S. and its allies claim they were on a winning streak in their offensive following the recapture of Tikrit. Ramadi is important in that it is a Sunni-dominated city that the Islamic State is likely claiming allegiance to. It was the site of major battles during the U.S. war and does not have a heavy Shia presence, either in the form of militias or civilians. Well, Chenjerai, is the battle for Ramadi demonstrating that the U.S. fight against ISIS is far more complicated and difficult than previously thought?
I think it is, and I think it really shows that, dealing with military solutions is a little bit more complicated. After Tikrit, there was a lot of talk about the success of airstrikes, and it is true that that airstrikes have played an important role in, protecting some of the citizens in regional areas. But, there's a great article on Al Jazeera that really talks about this strategy. And what I thought was interesting was the way it focuses on the non-military solutions as in addition to military solutions. So we're talking about things like, looking at issues of ideology, focusing on strengthening local political governments, and really trying to address the conditions that have made it possible for ISIS to spread into these various areas of Iraq. So it's complicated.
And anti-immigrant sentiment is high in South Africa. For the last few weeks, a wave of violence aimed at foreign nationals from countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, Malawi and Pakistan has resulted in at least 4 deaths in South Africa. Government forces in eastern Johannesburg fired tear gas and rubber bullets in an effort to disperse a group of anti-immigrant protesters today. And President Jacob Zuma made a public address saying, quote, "What is happening in our country is not acceptable." A counter-protest in support of the immigrant community in Durban today drew thousands of South African activists. Thousands of foreign nationals have been taking refuge in shelters. South Africa's unemployment rate is extremely high, with the official figures hovering at 25%. Chenjerai, does this story sound like a case of xenophobic forces taking advantage of people's frustrations with the economy, just as we're seeing in other countries like Germany, or Greece, even the U.S.?
Absolutely. This is another example of how the long effects of colonialism and current impact of unequal wealth distribution in South Africa and other places create situations where groups of poor people mistakenly view each other as the primary threat to their economic and cultural security. So fortunately, we do see this sentiment being countered by marches like the one taking place today in Durban. But there are also concerns, some of the foreign nationals feel that the government has not taken enough of a role. They say that they need government protection and not marches. I think our role is to really keep focused on the underlying economic conditions that really are the source of this kind of xenophobia.
And finally, here in the United States, 2 related cases challenging the authority of the Environmental Protection Agency are being heard in a D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals today. The cases are being brought by the 2 largest coal companies in the U.S. and more than a dozen states led by coal producer West Virginia. The coal lobby contends that the EPA does not have the right under the Clean Air Act to curb greenhouse gas emissions and thereby lead to the shuttering of their industry. Both sides will argue over a technical difference in the House and Senate versions of the bill that passed in 1990. Ultimately, the case is expected to end up at the Supreme Court. Coal-producing states are accusing the Obama administration of wanting to harm their economies. President Obama has sought to use existing law like the Clean Air Act and regulatory agencies like the EPA to address the dire situation of climate change. Well, Chenjerai, how important is this case, particularly given that Congress has not and likely will not take action to curb climate change, and the Clean Air Act and the EPA are the only limited tools that we have on a federal level?
That's right. These are limited tools that we have. And in situations like this, what I think has to be done is to maintain focus on the issue at hand. The arguments against the legislation are kind of amazing in that regard because they almost seem to make the points we're trying to make. Patrick Morrisey, Attorney General of West Virginia, said he was worried that this kind of regulation was going to transform the American energy economy. Yes, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to transform the American energy economy and make it more sustainable. Also, there was fears that this was taking advantage of a clerical error. I see that what's happening is the clerical issues are being used to sort of confuse and obfuscate the underlying environmental issues. So we need to give the EPA the authority to make this change. It's already too late, and we have to push forward.
Thank you so much, Chenjerai, for joining us as usual. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Our daily Newsflash guest expert on Thursdays is Chenjerai Kumanyika, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies at Clemson University. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.